Hi, my name's Eric from Trinity Property in Dudley. We're a small independent lettings and sales agency. Very good to be here with Alex, a good friend of mine, investor, property owner, and potentially with an idea that we'd like to share with you about a new way of a tenant being able to buy a property. Give us some thoughts.
Yes, if we give a bit of context around it, particularly in today's market, a lot of people can't get mortgages, affordability rates. You're looking at what, for the average mortgage now, is it at least 4.5%, pushing 5%.
Yep.
And a lot of people have been used to, the last 10 to 12, 13 years, they've been used to 2, maximum 3% for a residential mortgage.
Yeah.
Now we're pushing 5%. A lot of people have been wiped out. They can't buy those couple of £100,000 properties. They can't get in them.
Right.
Now I've been doing rent to buy, which is what we're talking about here, since 2013. We've done numerous of them. It's market dependent, but this is perfect for the tenant to be able to get their feet in the front door as future homeowners, rather than just paying what can be perceived as dead money in rent for 3 or 4 years.
Because traditionally a tenant would, as you say, have no benefit other than the fact that they live in the house and they're paying for it while they're there. So this is a means of them actually ended up owning it. In the
longer term, yeah, it gives them that opportunity, gives them the right, but not the obligation, which is important. Right, but not the obligation to buy the house in the future. Okay. So the way that I like to sort of frame up a rent to buy in terms of a house is, if most people get that with a car, right? Yes. So you put a little bit of a deposit down, or an upfront fee is what they generally call it, and then they pay monthly payments, and a small portion of that payment comes off the price, and then in 2-3 years time you can either buy the car or you just give the car back, and whatever the car company wants to do at that time.
And that's done. Okay.
And that works exactly the same.
Okay, so what do they need to be able to put down to get the whole process started?
What do you mean? Do you mean in terms of finances?
So let's say a tenant comes along, sees the property that we're advertising.
Yeah.
What do they have to do then?
We're going to talk about a property that is available right now, but
okay.
in general, they'd go through somebody like yourself, a trustworthy local agent who's happy to do a rent to buy for a landlord and a tenant buyer.
Yes.
And you would do your normal checks, make sure they could afford the monthly payments,
yeah.
make sure they have that upfront money.
Yeah.
Exactly the same in terms of tenancy. They have to be able to afford it, because what's the point in it doesn't work for anybody if they can't. That needs to be all checked. They also, all your AML stuff that you do anyway, that all needs to be done.
Yeah.
But the sweet spot is, there are millions of tenants in the UK now, and many of those would like to buy, but they just can't get that initial upfront money.
Yeah.
They can't get the 10, 15, 20% upfront. You come to us and do a rent to buy, all you need is, well, you get a lot less than that.
Yes.
It can be anything you want, but it can be a lot less than the 20, 15, 10% that the average bank require upfront.
As a deposit?
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good. So they would pay their normal rent per month and this deposit?
So the upfront money upfront.
Yes. Okay.
That has to, before they step foot in, that has to be done. It's all done legally.
Yeah.
There's no like handshakes or anything. It's all done through proper official paperwork. And then they pay a normal rent, but anything that they can afford on top of that rent, that can come off the price
on a monthly basis.
On a monthly basis. Yeah.
Okay. So they could be building up a fairly sizable deposit over a period of time.
So that's one way to do it. Let's use an example. So let's say the house is 200,000 and the market rent, let's say, is 900 a month, there or thereabouts. They can pay 1,000 a month, and that 100 every single month for, let's say, 3 years would either come off the price that we agree at the beginning, or it can be built into a deposit, so that in 3 years' time they will have saved that money up, that they can go to the bank and say, here's my deposit.
Okay, and they can get a mortgage at that point with
Correct.
that deposit. Okay.
Correct.
We've had some experience of doing that with another property that we used exactly the same process on. So the tenant paid their getting started money, as you suggested, up front. That was the money that they got saved already towards a property. They couldn't get a mortgage because their accounts weren't in order. They'd only been self-employed for a short period of time. So they wanted to rent to start with. So we agreed a period of time for them to rent with some extra payment, as you just suggested, on top. and that getting started money and their extra payments that they put together over the term went towards their deposit. They're then converted into a mortgage at that point, and then they're buying the property.
And that's a perfect example. Can't say anything better than that.
Correct.
And what price was that house?
So that was a property in Kimber, which is a nice area, and I think the property was around the £300,000 mark.
So this doesn't work for just people. Sometimes have the impression that this can only work for like low value.
No,
it doesn't. In fact, it very often works better, because the people who look for higher value type properties very often are self-employed types who simply don't put everything through the books. And therefore they can't go to a bank.
Show.
Exactly.
Right.
So the lenders are going, you don't earn enough, but that gives them the 12 month, 2 years or 3 years to go to the bank and say, no, I do earn this amount of money, can you lend me the mortgage?
And I've got a track record, and I've got this money that I've saved up ready to be able to use for the mortgage. Great, okay. From our point of view, we've got mortgage brokers that are familiar with this way of buying something, and we'll be able to get a mortgage sorted, so that's good. What sort of term are we typically talking on this type of arrangement?
It's very flexible. Anything, we do a deal with you good selves and with the tenant buyer, us as the owners of the property. Whatever suits everybody, around the table, that's what we can. Right. Generally speaking, we don't do more than 3 years, just because that should give people enough time to fix their credit, get a deposit together, sort the credit, build a deposit, show the banks that they are earning enough money. 3 years should be enough time to
you mentioned credit there. So could it apply to somebody that, for instance, doesn't have great credit at the beginning, but they're enough credit to be able to get the rental?
Yeah. So let's say you've missed a couple of credit card payments. Some banks take a look and say, okay, that happens. Some banks just flat out say no.
Right.
So if you have 12 months without missing a credit card payment, for example, a car payment, whatever it is, that generally speaking, they'll be more open to taking a look than if it's happened 2-3 months ago.
Yeah.
So that time is a healer, right? Time heals things.
Sure.
Give it a couple of years and you should be fine, ready to go.
Great, okay. That sounds really good. So this particular property that we're talking about, tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, so this is, it's classed as Wood Septon for anybody local, but it's a DY3 postcode, which is generally Sedgley and local areas.
Yeah.
It's a 3-bedroom end terrace, but it's a big end terrace, the old Victorian big old things.
Right.
And we're spending a bit of money on it now to bring it up to a decent rentable spec, but we want to give that opportunity to somebody to come and take that off us and buy it at a price today that we can agree today. They can buy it off us in 2 to 3 years time and turn themselves into homeowners rather than renters.
So there's that tenant buyer. So they start out as the tenant and end up as the buyer.
Correct.
At the end of that term.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if in 2-3 years they're not in a position, that's perfectly fine.
Okay.
We can move on.
Okay. Or could you possibly renegotiate if somebody wasn't in the right position at that point?
Of course we can.
So there's some flexibility.
Very flexible. We're not mortgage lenders by any stretch.
No.
With a mortgage, you don't pay your mortgage in 5 years' time. Your fixed terms up, and then the payments go up.
Yes.
Nothing like that happens.
No. So it's more about, sounds like a bit more of a relationship with the tenant buyer to make it work for everybody's good.
Correct. We want you to buy that from us. That's where we need to make money. That's how we make money, is from you buying. So we'll do everything we can to make sure that happens.
Yes, that sounds good.
Yeah.
And from our point of view as the agent, we're facilitating that with you. So we're setting up the tenancy in the initial stages, making sure that that's all set up correctly, because it has to be done properly. And then with the added agreement that we put together with the tenant buyer to be able to buy the property.
Correct.
Is there a particular agreement that you use for that?
To do the rent to buy contract.
Yes.
A normal AST.
Right.
And then
tenancy agreement,
okay. Tenancy agreement, and without scare, it's illegal talk, so without trying to scare people, you just do an option to buy contract.
Okay.
Very, in the commercial arena, in the business world, options are bread and butter.
Right.
In the same way as you do an AST, the commercial guys do options all the time, right?
Okay.
So all we do is an option to buy contract, which is, it can be a couple of pieces of paper. Certain solicitors want 70-80 pieces of paper, as you can imagine, to cover every single thing. Whichever way the tenant buyer wants to go, we're happy with. We can do either. We've got our own option to buy contracts. If you want to go down that route, fine. If not, go and use a solicitor. Of course, solicitors cost money. That's just the way. But in essence, they take pieces of paper off the shelf, change a few things, and then charge you £1,000 for it. So that's the reality of it. So,
but yes, you've got one that works.
Of course,
you've used it, works. I've got one that works.
I wouldn't be able to tell you how many we've done on our own paperwork.
Right.
So and
That's a good thing, I
gone
guess.
out the other end.
Yeah.
People have bought them off us.
That's great. We've got a track record that works.
Yeah.
Great. Okay.
Yeah. And from your angle, let me ask you, how could doing more rent to buys help you? Are you seeing properties sticking at the moment at certain prices, or?
Absolutely, and I think it would open up the market to a new type of buyer, somebody that wouldn't necessarily consider themselves as a buyer because they don't have a big deposit that the bank may want. They may not fit the mortgage criteria right now, but with some time, as you said, they may be able to do that. So if they could get their foot in the door into a property that they like the look of, then that could be their forever home. Then potentially this is a way of facilitating that. So I think it really could be a potential game changer for a lot of tenants.
Yeah, yeah.
And for us as a business, it's another revenue stream in the sense that we're selling properties, but via a different route. We survive on being able to sell or rent properties to buyers and tenants. And in this route, we're using both angles. We're using a tenant initially, and then we're turning them into a buyer for the end result of them owning their own home, which has got to be a good thing for everybody. So I think that could be really helpful too.
Yeah, and this is one of the beautiful things about this is it's like a small business to consumer operation.
Yeah,
it's not like big conglomerates or anything.
No.
It's like we can do a deal here.
Yeah,
everybody can do a transaction that fits everybody.
Yes.
We don't need to tick boxes that the big corporates need to tick.
No,
we can be flexible and evolve as the relationship evolves
and make it work for everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah. That sounds really good.
Yeah, and you being a small business and an agent local, I can see a huge opportunity to be that person who brings rent to buy into local in mainstream.
Yeah. I'd certainly like that to be the case, and I think it would be good to be different to a lot of other agents. It's not something that's common, particularly. You mentioned, as you say, with cars. When I first came across it, it was very. My understanding was such that, okay, I understand a car, you put an amount of money down to start with, you pay per month, and then you have the option to be able to buy it at the end of that period of time, or not, depending on what you want to do. And when you apply that to a house, it makes sense.
And in terms of paperwork, there's actually very little difference.
Right.
You just use AST, you don't use an AST for a car, you use a lease agreement.
Yes.
There's no difference, it's just different wording on the piece of paper.
But the same process.
Exactly.
And the end result is that you end up owning the property, or in that instance, the car.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the video, if people have any questions, do they come to you?
Yeah, certainly. Contact us initially. The details will be on the website to be able to have a contact point for us. And obviously then anybody that's interested and qualifies potentially to be able to go down this route, we put in touch with you, particularly to do with this property. They can go and have a look at it, have a conversation with you, and negotiate together until everybody's happy.
Yeah.
And we end up with somebody that's then going to end up owning that property.
Yeah.
Which would be great. Even if it's a couple of years down the road, that doesn't particularly matter. It's the process that we want to start. So yes, do contact us for further information. We'd be very happy to help.